Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
Why wasn't Abraham pursued in this matter? He did not live in the city. We don't hear about Abraham visiting and getting sexually assaulted. What's the deal here? Why didn't Abraham go through what these two men are going through?
I don't think we're ever told that he even visited the city.
No, we're not, but it's his family, so I'm assuming maybe that makes me a you-know-what.
No, it's hard not to think that there was some sort of connection between Sodom and Abraham. He saved these people. They knew who he was. He rescued Lot and the people of Sodom when the kings captured Lot and the possessions of Sodom. So they knew who he was. So maybe that's the reason they didn't take him and have their way with him. He was initiated by saving them.
I don't think so. I think they didn't feel the need to exert dominance over Abraham. If Lot was really at the gate and really was a prominent member of the society, and we can believe that he might have had some role of authority in the city from extra biblical text, then Abraham was guilty by association in terms of relatedness. We know that he would have been a guest if he went, but he was still a relative of an important person in the city. He wasn't a stranger.
I don't know that he ever fully went into the city. One, he doesn't seem to fully understand how bad things are in the city.
But he delivers things back to the city. So if he didn't do it personally, fine. But he interacted with their kings. He interacted with their inhabitants.
He interacted with them at some point. But also keep in mind, Lot sits at the city gate. The only reason he would go there is for Lot, and Lot is at the city gate. So he doesn't actually have to go into the city at all.
Yeah. But I still think it's weird. I think it's worth pointing out. Maybe it's stupid.
I don't think it's stupid.
And this is where the Jewish tradition on this one, Abraham is so righteous that the whole reason he has people wash his feet is so that the dust of the idol worship doesn't get into his house. If he's unaware of what's happening in Sodom, one, how would he be unaware of the great sin of Sodom being so close to it? Why would he be okay with Lot being there? Like, where does Abraham's righteousness come in for calling out not his brother? But
I would argue that because he literally rejects the gifts from Sodom, like when he saves them. I don't want to be known as being rich owing to you guys or anything. So he does have some familiarity with the sins of Sodom and the depravity there. However, just because he's aware that bad things happen there doesn't mean he's aware of just how bad it is. I think that because he's somewhat familiar with the people, because he's interacted with them before, he knows that it's bad. But I don't think he believes, judging from his reaction when God tells him he's going to blow up the city, I don't think he's aware of how many people, or rather how few righteous people are left in the city. Because presumably there were some left when he had his interaction with Sodom, because God didn't allow them to be destroyed at that point. It would have made things easy. He'd just not save them and be destroyed by the 5 kings. But he didn't. It's only at this point now that God decides to destroy the city. But there's a lot of conjecture in this particular conversation. It's possible that at some point he did go to Sodom, or maybe he went multiple times. But I don't think he's the type of person who would have actively gone in. He definitely wouldn't have involved himself in the activities in the city.
No, yeah, definitely not.
So did the people recognize these men as heavenly beings? We touched on this earlier.
So we could go through the cultural examples of this show of dominance and humiliation. It has more graphic language. It's important to know that these were some of the things that could have happened in the city of Sodom, that probably happened in the city of Sodom. But some of the language is really important because it talks about how it changes the status of a human being. They would go from being free to being a slave, or they would go from being a man to not being a man, and they would do these things in front of their fathers. Like, it's a big deal.
Yeah, so tying this back into the cultural setting too, and what was surrounding Abraham and these different A&E cultures, like you have Assyrian conquests, reading something like this. I captured his warriors and cut off their testicles. I paraded their naked bodies through the city and hung their heads from walls. You have Hittite laws on sexual assault of captives. So this would be potential prisoners of war, or even in this case, like Sodom, you could see this being people coming into the city that they didn't much care for. But the Hittite law on the sexual assault of captives or prisoners of war, tablet 189, if a man forces intercourse upon another man against his will, he shall not be executed for doing this act, but it is an offense of humiliation, not of theft. You have Herodotus in Histories 989. They defiled the young men of the city in acts of force, making them into women before the eyes of their own fathers. So you have this idea that this is for declaring their dominance. It is for marking them as slaves, taking captive of them. You have this surrounding cultures that did this to not just prisoners of war, but people that they wanted to make known are lesser or not men, to take captive of them.
We see this theme in Genesis where it's like super important to carry on a father's line. And with Abraham, it's like literally most of the point of his story. And with Lot and the end of his story, his daughters do things out of concern for carrying on the lineage. So to emasculate sons in front of their fathers was basically saying your line is done. Your family no longer exists.
And this is done for no other reason than for the pleasure of robbing someone of their life. And not even just killing them, because that would have been one thing. But no, robbing them of their livelihood, of their life, of everything that they are.
It's really easy to whitewash this story into a vacation Bible school story. And part of what we're doing here is challenging those. We have to understand the horrifying truths of Sodom and Gomorrah in order to take these stories seriously, in order to really understand what God was doing, in order to have good apologetics for when other people question how a good God could do these things. How could people deserve salvation doing things like this? It's very hard for humans to wrap their head around.
For humans who have morality. So there's apologists who are good, then there's really good apologists who take the problem of evil and use it as a proof for the existence of God. And I think we've talked about this before, the brothers Karamazov, and not going to go into detail of that. It's a very dark read, but it talks about how people take pleasure in doing evil deeds and how depraved it is and how far you have to get that. I don't know how to say it because that would be very dark for this episode.
Basically, the Turks did a whole lot of terrible things with mothers and children. They would play little games with the babies in front of their mothers and then kill them in horribly graphic ways, terrible ways, ways that serve no purpose aside from watching the women weep. Yes, it's pleasure in cruelty. And this culminates with one of the characters saying, I don't know if the devil exists, but if he doesn't, we have made him in our image. The point of that is to say that humans are capable of immeasurable cruelty and evil. That is not something we're accustomed to today because the Christian world fought very hard to eliminate it. The Judeo-Christian values have built kind of a bulwark around us and have created a very safe society where folks like atheists can come around and laugh and hee-haw and tell us that evil is a fairy tale and it doesn't really exist. It's a monster we defeated ages ago and we are the enlightened modern man. We're not. We're the same people we've always been.
And the same people who say that a good God wouldn't do what he did in Sodom and Gomorrah can't also be confused about somebody killing Hitler or injustices that have happened over centuries. Like, we see repeated time and time again this insane cruelty that it defies everything and it defiles what God created in ways that are honestly more and more disturbing and creative and horrifying. It's like the complete twisting of something that God designed to be good is the opposite.
And what we don't really see today, but is still true, is that evil is a taint. It's something that marks you. When evil is done to you, like we see this with children who've had evil enacted on them when they're very young, it's something that they carry with them for the rest of their lives. It becomes something that they need to be counseled through, helped through, because it's not something that they can shoulder themselves.
Yeah, and you don't need to look at religious information. You can look at scientific traumatic responses for just research the foster care system and the traumatic responses that kids carry with them from those experiences. Doesn't even have to get Christian.
It changes the size of your brain. Child abuse and trauma experienced by people in their formative years makes the size of their brain significantly smaller than a well-adjusted, raised child. It is astonishing the things that happen to our bodies as a response of trauma. We are not as resilient as we give ourselves credit for. And when we uselessly subject others to cruelty, we damage them. And that evil is perpetuated through disability or through the inability to move forward, or it is that generational curse that we hear about today. And it's carried forward through acts of evil that defy everything that God has for us.
And imagine a childhood that's soaked by malevolence. You don't have a moment's rest from it. Every single person you know is evil and terrible and is enacting the worst possible evils and terrors onto you.
How would children even survive that? Like how in Sodom, like, of course, 2,000, 3,000 people is small. But like, how would they have even kept their own people alive if they're that cruel?
We're even told all the men, young and old, showed up for this.
Yeah.
They were all going to take turns doing horrible things to these visitors. The youths too, the teenagers. You can make arguments for the littlest of the kids, but again, what kind of little kids are growing up in this kind of a dark, terrible world?
Yeah. And this is sad. It's sad for the people they hurt. And it's sad because there were people raised generationally through this that could have had a different outcome, but didn't because they believed in ending travel and they wanted to sit and feast on their own waste, basically.
Yeah, and I wanted to stay here a little bit, and I know we covered a lot of this when we talked about the flood, but one of the biggest reasons for deconstruction of Christians is the Old Testament, but more specifically, this idea that God wipes out nations or the entire earth or different countries. But I think that's our Western privilege or our even future privilege of not understanding the total depravity. I'm not Calvinist here, but the total depravity that humanity can get
is
to,
capable of.
And the whole idea why we lined up this anthropomorphic language of where God is telling Abraham, reassuring Abraham that he's checked, he's looked for these righteous people and they're not there. There is nobody deemed righteous. I don't even think Lot is righteous in this story. He is saved on behalf of Abraham. There is nobody righteous there. It is ready to go. And you see Abraham struggling with that, but it needs to happen.
My heart weeps for the loss of those people, the people that were harmed and the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, because I know what it's like to be a loving parent and raise my children with good morals and to have a good life, a much better life than living in tents and being in dirty cities and not being sure what was going to happen. I don't have a lot of reference for an ancient lifestyle, but my heart weeps because this is a hard story. The things that happened were hard.
And this may be a little too abstract for people thinking this is all in the past. This doesn't apply to us today. And this is just a silly story in Genesis. Who knows if it even happened? There are scholars who even debate if Genesis literally happened or not. This still does apply today. The worst impulses of humanity are still here.
And in America, we see that reflected in things like abortion or the gay rights movement or things. We're very privileged to be able to get offended over living people making decisions that keep them alive.
And we are the number one consumer of human trafficking in the world.
Yeah.
We have millions of sex slaves in the United States.
And I could go on and on about pornography and the way that it perpetuates sexual violence and the same domination over people that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, but we whitewash it. And we're seeing the highest incidence of sexual violence now, perpetrators, they're aged 13 to 17. We are in an epidemic very similar from the same roots. We're just calling it different things. And we're saying, I'm by myself in my room, so it's no different. It's the same thing. And Jesus tells us that in the New Testament.
We have young boys growing up with pornography on 50 different tabs. It's a tab and a tab and a tab. And they're stimulated in 1,000 different ways that just aren't natural.
Yeah.
And with things that are legitimately evil.
And not even realistic.
No. And the types of fetishes that they indulge in. But it's considered okay because it's not real.
I'm not hurting anybody, but you're hurting yourself. There's a lot. You're paying into a system that is basically Sodom.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to remember that God does not like this any more now than he did then. And in the book of Revelation, tying this into church history, there is a punishment that is merited by this activity. By the whore of Babylon, the adulteries, the grapevine of God's wrath is crushed and the winepress spills out and it washes over us all. We are going to see God's wrath for all of the terrible things that are done. But we tend to forget that. We tend to focus a lot on the kind, happy Jesus, the I love everyone, the I want to save everyone, for God so loved the world. But he also tells us to go and sin no more because sin is terrible and he brought all of that on himself. He suffers for eternity for the things that we do. To our shame, we cause him to sacrifice himself on the cross all over again, every time we sin.
Maya Angelou has a couple of poems talking about evil being universal, like the potential for evil being universal in all of us. And we have to be very cautious because being under the new covenant, knowing what we know about Jesus's ministry and how different things were for Jesus compared to now, but also compared to the time of Abraham, our capacity for evil is the same, and evil is evil. There's no sliding scale where you're going to get judged and God's going to say, this sin is a minor sin, but this other sin is like very bad. Like sin is sin and it separates us from God. And we know what God hates and we know what God reacts to and we know what God has already judged for. And if this story is not a call to repentance, I don't know what is.
Well, there are plenty of people who say, yeah, but like, I'm not doing anything. We in modern America aren't doing anything. We're civilized society. Your hearts aren't any different from the people of Sodom. I don't believe our hearts are any different from theirs. The difference is that there are consequences if we act on these desires. And you can see that. You can see the human heart and its corruption at work if you go on the internet for even more than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Go to the comment section where people, of any video on YouTube, where people can say things anonymously, where consequences don't matter. Things they would never say in a million years to someone's face. Now suddenly they'll say it as much as they want. They'll say it to anybody as often as they can. There's literally people we call trolls who just, that's all they do because all they want to do is get a rise out of somebody.
And you don't feed them.
Nope, don't feed the trolls. Most of the lack of evil that we see, and I don't even know that there is that much of a lack of evil, it's just different evil. But most of the most obvious, what we would consider the most egregious acts of evil that we don't see because it would be punished. But the thin veneer of society, if you lose those 4 meals, you go 4 days without eating, the rule of law is gone. Suddenly you see that horrible temperament come out.
We care more about what Kim Kardashian is up to than what Jesus is up to as a culture. If you think that the celebrities that you may or may not be following are like these great virtuous people, they've done stuff to get where they are. Stop looking at the shiny, pretty things and go look for the ugly, broken, in need of attention things surrounding you. Stop looking at the sparkly things. Put your phone down. Stop doing what makes you comfortable and go out and actually be the church. If you're here listening, go out, stop listening and go out and be the church right now. It needs you.
It does. The depravity that humanity is capable of is important, especially seeing as that is one of the main reasons people leave the church is difficult texts like Sodom and Gomorrah here.
And then we have 3 daughters. We have 3 beautiful daughters. And I cannot imagine being like, take them, like Lot does here. And I think we should definitely spend a little time breaking that down too, because these men are in Lot's home. The men of the city are surrounding his home, and Lot's, here, go rape my daughters. Leave these men alone. Why did he do that? And what do we think about what happened after this, where the angels blinded the men and slammed the door?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the biggest text clue of, I think Lot knew exactly who they were, which some people debate. I know Christian commentaries debate, as well as Jewish tradition debates whether Lot actually knew they were angels or just men. To me, like, him offering up his daughters for complete strangers does not make sense at all. So this, I think, indicates that Lot knew exactly who they were, why they were there, and needed to try and prevent that by any means necessary. Still, I don't know if I could do that, being a girl dad.
It's hard because if the mob didn't know that they were angels, but Lot did, maybe Lot's only hope was that the angels could do something. But either way, it's entirely plausible that Lot's daughters get what he's offering them for anyway, because there's potentially 1,500 men versus 6 people in a household. I find this sacrifice very interesting, knowing what's to come with Isaac. There is this idea of like culturally acceptable child sacrifice, and Lot was in the midst of that. And it's almost like he's saying, here's my offering for you, angels, so that you don't kill us. And then we have this righteous offering from Abraham that juxtaposes this situation. I find it very interesting. It's just another one of the parallels between Abraham and Lot, and how they did the same exact things, but with totally different intentions.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, building on the use of behold here, starting at verse 7, and he said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Again, a use of behold, but it's for selfish reasons.
It also shows that he doesn't have as much authority as maybe we think.
No, because immediately their response to them is, you dare judge us. But they said, stand back. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. So yeah, it is clear from the text that he was an important man in Sodom. He got to sit at the city gate. Sitting at the city gate is important because that means that for all people who visit, you are the first person they get to meet. You are the first person they get to see.
And Lot didn't stop them from hurting the visitors.
Nope.
Except this time.
This is the one time, it seems, because this probably happened many times, and Lot did nothing. This is the one time where he interferes.
Ouch. Makes it hard to like him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so none of this works anyway. The mob still wants the angels. They are pressing on Lot so much that the door almost gets broken down. The angels take Lot in, and then they blind all the people.
So they're stumbling around. And I have some questions here, because this is where that problem of evil question comes back. So why doesn't God prevent all evil from taking place against innocence? And were the girls protected because of the person crying out to the Lord for experiencing something similar as discussed in the beginning of this episode? Were the angels carrying out the judgment and punishment for the offering of these girls, or is it greater? I think it's greater. And then was this an act of the angels protecting the daughters, or were they making the statement to Lot that this placeholder is not enough to make them leave in the morning? Like, they're not the plan that is in Lot's mind for them to just stay the night and leave early the next morning. That's not what's happening here. And is that what they're doing? Like, they're preventing this mob from breaking down the door only so that Lot and his family can get out to honor Abraham's wishes, but really to show Lot, like, no, you're not the one in charge here. We are. What do you think?
I think them taking the actions that they do at this point, where they save Lot's life and they blind all the people there, it serves multiple purposes. One, I do think that it is meant to show their authority. They are the only ones at this point with any control. Lot has none. So one, it's showing Lot his place. And two, it's showing that these angels really are angels, that they are powerful, and they are the ones with authority. And Lot needs to defer to them, not the mob. And that's what he should have been doing anyway. But also, as far as the problem of evil, this does come up every single time, like you said, Cody. It comes up when you talk about the flood, or when you talk about the extermination of the Ammonites or the Amorites, or anyone who gets exterminated, some of the Philistines. Anytime that there's a mention of they were wiped down to the last man, woman, and child, people always say, yeah, but why? And we've discussed this already, the tainting of evil, the fact that it can corrupt everyone. If you have a whole city full of people, it does touch everyone. But setting that aside, why does God even allow it? This goes back to the very beginning. We have to ask why God would allow evil to start. And this is something that's been debated a lot, and it depends on what it is you believe, if we have free will or not. If you don't believe that we have free will, I honestly couldn't tell you, because it means that God has determined every action, both good and bad.
Yeah, then we're just in a giant dollhouse of horrors.
Mm-hmm. And we have no say in anything. Every good decision we make is actually from God, and every bad decision we make is equally from God. God has chosen that 99.999% of everyone who's ever existed, he doesn't love. He wants to send them off to hell and have no redemption for them.
He's a potter that breaks his faces.
Mm-hmm. He could have loved everyone. He could have saved everyone. He has the power to do it, and that's the position of the universalist. And at least I understand that position, because it's the claim that we don't have any choice, but God does, and he loves everyone, therefore he saves everyone. But if you believe we don't have a choice, then why exactly does he bother with this whole charade? The only answer I've ever heard when I've had this conversation with people is for his glory. What does that even mean?
That excludes the human emotional experience, which if you're going to question God because of these stories, then you're coming at it from an emotional perspective. You can't remove the emotionality of these responses.
Well, am I questioning these stories and God because God's forcing me to do it? Like, frequently you'll hear Christians who take this position say it's wrong to question God. I'm only questioning God because he's forcing me to do it, if you are right.
It's not just that. There's a lot of, so I've heard it preached many times where either you have a secret sin and that's preventing you from accepting or having the faith that you need to really be a true believer, or your own stubbornness and needing to control and know things is the reason why you don't know things, and you just got to have faith. There's a lot of damaging pastoral language here, and it makes people leave. It makes people say, okay, if it doesn't make sense to me and you can't explain it outside of I just got to believe, or I'm doing something sinful and I'm the bad guy here and I shouldn't question the pastor or the church, I'm out of here. That's very problematic.
Yeah, this one is like the determinist side. Like you're just hot air, you're a clanging gong if you're talking about anything, because it's all predetermined anyway, so it's pointless to discuss. But if you're on the opposite side of that, trying to figure things out and how this works, like to me, how this works is, again, there's multiple covenants in place here. God has restrained himself from enacting pure justice for short periods of time. It seems like long periods, like 6,000 years to us seems like a long period. That's not necessarily the case for God. Like, he chooses to not enact perfect justice during a short period of time to, one, teach us, show us, but also the idea of true love towards him. Like there is no glory if it is a robotic decision made for me that I'm going to praise, worship, and love God. There is no glory for God in that. You can call it what you want, but to me, there's no glory in robots worshiping anybody. But you also have this question pop up in other history too. And one of the reasons I like Jewish history so much is because they're not afraid to ask these questions. Like one of the midrash on Genesis, where Abraham's going back and forth with God, you have this. So I'll just read the quote. So Rabbi Levi or Levi said, Abraham was speaking with God. Shall the judge of all the earth not practice justice? If you wish to have a world, there can be no strict justice. And if you wish to have strict justice, there can be no world. You seek to hold the rope from both ends. You wish to have the world and you wish to have strict justice. If you do not concede somewhat, the world will be unable to endure. You have this idea, and I think that's what is at play here. If God has perfect justice all the time, you're not going to have free choice and autonomy and us being able to play a role in God's creation. Everybody seems to believe why we're here. We're playing a role in God's creation. He's given us dominion of the world. He's given angels the ability and the idea that they're supposed to be pointing back to him as the true God, not perfectly revealing himself, because I think that would force him to enact his true and perfect justice on us, but having people play their parts and culminating into this true and honoring glory and love towards him.
You see this in the New Testament when Jesus describes people as a royal priesthood, and he reassigns us this priesthood of the temple of the world. We are called to bring this message to the ends of the earth so that everybody knows. There's no excuse. Everybody knows the message of Jesus. And that's our reclaiming of Eden now. Romans and other New Testament books talk about suffering and how it produces like resilience and resourcefulness and hope. And we know that the world is going to have suffering in it, and it's probably mostly senseless. It's all related to human evil, selfishness, lazy sin. So it's really hard to wrap our minds around how people could hurt us or how God could kill massive amounts of people. But I think it's one of those things where it is explained to us. And if we can study it and pray about it and wrestle with it, sometimes the wrestling is our ministry. Like I know for Cody, the wrestling is his ministry. Like he has not come up with a answer that is satisfying outside of just not allowing his hunger for the Lord to die. There were people in our walk together that fed you such crap as pastors and leaders and teachers. And it was really unsatisfying. And we hear it all the time today. And it makes me viscerally angry to have pastors shame people for wrestling. I think that's a value in the body of Christ, is somebody who knows how to wrestle. There were people in the Bible who wrestled with God, and they were very important people to God. Abraham wrestled with God in a way. All of that is to say, if you're one of those people that's, I don't know, man, I don't know if I believe it, I'm really struggling with this, just know that maybe your role in the body of the church is to be somebody that's brave enough to wrestle with these things publicly.
Not to give in to the atheistic notion, but there is a lot of brainwash in the church. There is a lot of, one, we've been conditioned not to ask these questions. And two, if we do, the people who do are quickly anathematized, like they're excommunicated. And you can play a big part in doing it in a respectful way, but asking these questions so other people do. Because there's stuff that people will ask, and I'll be like, I've never even thought about that. That's such a great question. Like, I didn't see it that way. And that's the beauty and the community of the church, and why community is an important factor, because people are going to see stuff that you don't, and they're going to ask questions if they're coming to the text critically, thinking critically of it, to open things up to you that you haven't seen, or glean different characteristics of God that you haven't seen that are the beauty. Like, that's part of the church. Like, we're not all created the same. People see things differently. And
you never arrive at this pinnacle. We're not Buddhists. We don't arrive at nirvana or whatever it is. Like, you have to have a posture of continued learning and knowing that you will never arrive until you are judged, which is what happened at Sodom. They were judged.
It's been a while since we've referenced Job, but I feel the themes in Job are so very good for addressing this question, the concept of evil, the problem with it, and the issues with people asking deep questions in the church and getting simple answers that can't fill them. Job has a very serious question. He has a series of questions. He has legitimate grievances against God because he says he doesn't deserve what's happening to him. And he is correct. He didn't do anything to deserve the bad things that happen. We're shown in the very beginning of the story there is a reason that this is happening to Job, because if good things only ever happen to good people, their goodness means nothing. They are doing good things so that good things happen. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. We don't see a whole lot of open acts of horrendous evil in modern America, not because we're full of righteous people, but because there is literally no reason to do these horrible acts of evil. But you remove the consequences, and you feed the hunger just a tiny bit, and the world changes dramatically. Throughout the whole story of Job, Job shows himself to be a righteous man. But he has questions, and he is surrounded by people who do not let him ask the question. When God shows up at the end, does he tell Job that he's stupid for asking the question? No. Does he tell him to pray for his friends who are being stupid and telling him that he was evil? Yeah. But he doesn't give Job the answer. We as the readers get the answer for why. Job, at least initially, doesn't. Now we get the whole story of Job, so maybe at some point it finally does get revealed to Job why all this happens. But he's content before that answer is given simply because he knows God heard him. And sometimes that is what we need. We pursue, and the answer that we get is, I hear you. And as Christians, if that's the answer God gives us, that is the point that we say it's enough. Sometimes it is enough to know that there is a reason, and for right now, we're not given the answer. But you also, by the same stroke, need to be able to refute when people tell you the wrong answer.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be satisfied with the wrong answer. What would have happened if Job accepted, you know what, you're right, I'm a terrible, awful, evil person.
What do you think would have happened to Job if he took them at face value? What would have happened to his relationship with God?
Religious OCD. I must be doing something wrong. I have to analyze everything in my life. What could I possibly be doing wrong?
If it was me, I'd leave.
Yeah.
I'd be like, it's not worth it.
Yeah, if he's known as righteous and he's doing the right things, what else could I possibly do that would make me righteous, that would not allow these things to happen? And I see parallels, and we covered it in previous episodes with Hagar. With Job, he's told to get over it, and Hagar's told,
go suffer some more.
Go suffer some more. That you have to, as a Christian, you have to be okay with that answer. But like Ben said, like, Job heard God and knew that God heard him. It's the same that, like, Ishmael literally means the God who sees, right? He saw Hagar, like, she was seen and heard by God, and that was enough. She went and suffered some more. So I think there's merit to what you're saying. Just knowing that God hears and sees you is good enough.
Well, and eventually Hagar did get the answer, and we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But Ishmael does become a mighty nation unto himself. And if she had left, that never would have happened.
This is also not saying, in the story of Job too, is, they both become very prosperous, or this is not prosperity gospel.
No.
God wants to prosper you.
And that isn't to say that you wouldn't, but I would say that no matter what you do prosper, the question is, what kind of prosperity are you searching for? If you're searching for spiritual fulfillment, if you pursue God, I guarantee you that's what you will get. If you pursue him with all of your heart, it will be rough, just like it was rough for Job. Just because you are a righteous person doesn't mean you're going to be spared suffering. But suffering does increase righteousness if you do it with the Lord at the center of it.
Sometimes you need that angry gumption to say, no, that answer's not good enough for me. And like, to speak up and say so. That didn't satisfy me. What you just said right there, no. When another person is interpreting your situation or your struggles, and they're like, it's secret sin, or you just got to believe, you have to have the gumption to say, not good enough.
When comparing Job to Lot for a second, when Job is surrounded by people effectively doing evil to him, telling him that he's evil, that he's wrong, that he's made the mistake, he responds with the truth. He never at any point lies. And he never does evil. He says the truth. He says, I know it's pointless, but I would argue my case before God because I've done nothing wrong.
Yeah, Lot's not ready for what's about to happen, and he's putting every Band-Aid he can on the situation to try to make it stop. He's trying to put a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage.
If we continue with the story, we see the angels tell him, Find anyone who's related to you, anyone who's with you in your family, sons-in-law, daughters, get them out of Dodge.
Yeah, his sons-in-law think he's joking. Did Sodom know they were that bad that they made apocalypse jokes all the time? I'm just curious.
Yeah, if I rushed into my mom and dad's room and was like, hey, mom, dad, we need to get out of here. Nukes are about to drop on this house. We're all going to die. And they went, ha, funny prank, bro. No. One, Lot gives up immediately. He doesn't drag them out. It seems as if he is dragging his own feet.
He literally is.
Yeah,
yes, he is. The angels literally have to pick him up and move him. We should actually read that because...
Dude, what are you doing? They've already proven themselves. They blinded the town.
Mm-hmm. So this is Genesis chapter 19, verse 15. As the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he was lingering. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. They literally had to remove him from the city by force.
Yeah, but to me, this again is pointing towards Lot was saved for Abraham. I don't think Lot was saved.
But he doesn't go back to Abraham. It makes me so mad. The dude could have tucked his tail and he could have gone home. Abraham gave him the land that he had. Abraham was like, let's split everything. He was so fair.
Yeah, and you get first pick.
And objectively, he should have, because eventually, and we'll get to it, Abraham finds out that there are people worthy of getting married in his own home. And Lot's daughters don't know that. And we will get to that. And it's a very sad part of this story, amongst a pile of sad parts of the story.
It's just a sad story.
Just an overall sad story. Sorry that this isn't a more uplifting episode, or pair of episodes, because this is probably part 2. But yeah, so continuing on, at 17, as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords, behold, there's that behold again. Your servant has found favor in your sight. He's not asking them. He's telling them, I've found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved.
He's such a snake oil salesman here.
He's such a little turd. He's horrible.
He's here. Send my daughters out. They can get used up and thrown away because at least like my wealth and standing will be preserved. But then everyone's blind. So I guess you really are doing this. And okay, I guess I will leave, but you have to make me. And then, okay, can I at least keep this one little city that's nearby? And then actually I'm not going to stay in that city because I'm scared. And then I'm going to go up and make babies with my daughters in the mountains.
Spoilers.
What?
When the angels here, and one of them I do believe is Michael. I think it's pretty clear. Lot seems to recognize him. That seems to be how it is that he recognizes the 2 people coming in as angels. Michael is the angel that's meant to represent justice and judgment. He is the king of righteousness, and he's the one who set over this whole region to judge it. So if we're assuming the divine council worldview is correct, and this is a part of Michael's job, then that's what he's here for, and that's what Lot would have recognized him since he met Melchizedek before. Already he knows this isn't the guy he should be arguing with. But immediately, once he's given his job, his directive from angels, they
like,
say, nah, let me go to this town and don't destroy it.
That was originally meant for destruction.
Yeah, so there were actually 5 cities total that were supposed to be destroyed. Let's see.
Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar.
And Zoar was spared. All 5 were going to be destroyed. But because Lot had to run his mouth and ask for Zoar to be spared, because he didn't want to go where the angels told him. And why? It seems like he's making an excuse.
The crazy thing to me is Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim got destroyed, never to be rebuilt. Zoar existed till the Middle Ages. It's crazy how the name of the city means like insignificant, and yet it was significant enough to exist for another, I think, 2,500 years.
Something like that.
It's wild.
Yeah. So now they're fleeing the city. You have the constant one of Lot's wife looks back,
Turns to a pillar of salt.
turns to a pillar of salt. And I think this pops up in Luke, like it says, remember Lot's wife. And this is more of that, I think, high context, low context. I think there's a lot more to Lot's wife and what that is. But he also follows it up with whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. It feeds into that idea that Lot and his wife were wanting to keep what they had in Sodom. I really think only Lot was only spared because of Abraham. Lot's lingering. His wife looks back and turns to a pillar of salt.
And this is another one of those things. Lot meddles a little bit for the preservation of Zoar, but Abraham meddled a little bit by asking to spare the 10 righteous men in Lot's family. To me, this is another one of those things, like it has far-reaching consequences because the offspring of Lot at this point then becomes a major issue to the Israelites. So Abraham's offspring is negatively impacted yet again by Lot's offspring.
There are multiple points where human decision damages things. What was it? Was it King Hezekiah who had the ailment and God told him he was going to die? I can't remember if it was Hezekiah or not.
I don't think it was Hezekiah.
But there was a king in Judah who was going to die. He had an illness, and he inquired of the Lord what was going to happen to him, and the prophet said, "You're going to die. Set your house in order." And he says, "Please don't let me die. I've been a righteous king. I've been a good king. Please heal me." And it's a bit of a long story, but basically the prophet inquires of the Lord. The Lord says, "Okay, I'll give him a sign that I'm going to heal him, and I will add 10 years to your life." And he does. But during those 10 years, envoys from Babylon show up, and this king shows off all of the wealth of Judah. And they go into the temple, and they see all the golden shields and all of the wealth of Solomon and all of the wealth of the temple. And the Babylonians are like, "Cool, we want it." And once again, the prophet is, "Okay, I just heard from the Lord, what you did was stupid, and now Israel's going to be taken over." If the king had accepted God's judgment, because God told him what was right, if he just accepted that, then it all would have been fine. But because he didn't accept God's judgment and wanted something for himself, and he even says, "Thank God it's not going to happen during my lifetime," this man was acting selfishly, and as a result, he doomed a whole generation, multiple generations of Israelites, of Judeans, to be separated from their homeland and live in exile. The same thing happens here. Abraham very easily could have just said, "Look, whatever it is you want to do it. What you do is right.
I trust you."
Lot could have also said, "You know what, Lord, whatever it is, you're going to do it. I and my family, as for me,
We will serve the Lord.
And he could have also just said, "You know what, I'm going to go into the mountains. I'm going to rejoin Abraham," which I think is the real thing. He was making excuses. He didn't want to rejoin Abraham. That seems to be what the angels were saying. Go rejoin Abraham. They don't say it in so many words.
There was a lot of conflict between their two families.
But at this point, the main source of conflict was the herds.
Mm-hmm.
And now Lot has nothing. But Lot is so determined to not return to Abraham. He's like, "No, send me to Zoar."
We all know Abraham would have been like, "Okay, take some of mine."
Yeah.
He already did.
But instead, he saves Zoar. And as it turns out, he leaves Zoar anyway. Because he's afraid while he's in Zoar. Because Zoar isn't a good place.
He probably sees more of the same and is, "I'm out of here."
Yes, the same reason that Sodom was destroyed and Gomorrah was destroyed is why Zoar was going to be destroyed. He didn't save anything.
Yeah, at all. But this leads us into one of the weirdest sections of this chapter of Genesis. Goes to Zoar. He's scared to live there, so they go. He takes now just his 2 daughters and himself up into the mountains, and they're so scared because it's raining fire and brimstone.
Yeah, okay, here's the thing. I just got chased out of my hometown, the only place I've ever known. I'm pretty sure everybody's dead. I left the other surrounding city that the angels spared because my dad said so, and I'm up in a mountain. My intended husband's dead. So let's have sex with our dad and have babies when we're living in the wilderness.
When they're in a cave. They were living in a house not that long ago. Now they're living in a cave.
Also, they ran in fear, but they had enough wine to get him drunk 2 nights in a row.
They were probably getting that from Zoar.
I don't know. It would have been like a 4.5 hour walk. That's a big...
If you want wine bad enough.
And also they had money to do that, or were they stealing it? And if it was just the girls doing it, then they would have been unprotected and visitors in a city that was known to be a part of a civilization that sexually assaulted the visitor. Like, it just doesn't add up to me. They would have had to been traveling with something. So, okay, their provisions were enough that they could get their dad drunk and get pregnant on command. Okay.
Jewish tradition has wine being stored in these caves by the surrounding.
Oh, good. Okay.
So they were pilfering other people's wine.
Yeah, they were Jack Sparrowing it.
Mm-hmm.
They needed more rum.
So really, this is another situation where tradition helps a lot, because if it turns out these are the caves where they stored the wine, effectively they are cowering in caves meant to cool other people's wine.
In their pantries.
In their pantries. They are hiding in someone else's pantry. And these two girls are looking at their dad, and they're like,
let's have sex with him. Light bulb moment. Like, what? Okay, first of all, Lot offered their virginity up for corruption. And now they're like, we need to carry on the family line with our dad.
The thing is, they probably didn't hear that. Remember, he closed the door behind him. So they didn't even know that their dad had offered them up.
Maybe.
No, it says that he shut the door. This was a city.
Maybe. I don't know.
The remnants of these cities show that they were actually buildings. That
they did have mud bricks and stuff. You're right. It strikes me as really weird. And then the eldest is the one that influences the youngest and is, let's do this. See, I'm a doula by trade. Pregnancy is a complicated decision. And back then, having a baby in a cave, the chances of that child dying were very high. You have no water, you have no provisions, you have no money, no flock, nothing to keep your family supported.
They have wine.
They have other people's wine that they're eventually going to get caught for stealing. That being, it would be the same as if Cody and I were like, we're unemployed and we're selling our home and we have no health insurance. Let's have a baby.
Yeah, so this to me connects back to the story of Ham and the severe punishment that Ham got Canaan out of his act. So you have the intentions here, which is in Scripture, of the daughters. 31, and the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. It seems like their intentions here, like they think the world is ending. They think their family's line is done, and they're trying to preserve that through their father. Not great intentions, but not the same with Ham and the Noah story.
It's interesting to see that the act of intercourse here is not, like, it's shameful, but it's not as shameful as it would be to not carry on your family line.
It's really tough to parse out what the thought process here was for these young ladies, because as far as they're concerned, one, massive amounts of fire from heaven has just fallen over everything that they knew. Everything was burning, and it was unlike anything they've ever seen. They've lost their mother at this point as well. And the place that they fled to, Zoar, they're afraid to stay in. So it's full of terrible, awful, disgusting people. As far as they're aware, the one remnant of humanity in all of the world, maybe, is just full of awful, evil, disgusting people. So he may be the best option that they have. The only man effectively that they love in any sense of the word.
So it's interesting that Abraham and Sarah went into Egypt, and the concern was, are they married? And making Sarah appear unmarried. But then for these girls, they're like, there's nobody to protect us. Our dad is getting old. There may be no men left. So let's carry on the line where we can. Like, so quickly, the perspective has changed.
And to be clear, this is bad.
Yeah.
It's very bad. The Bible doesn't even treat it as a good thing. And it specifically says Lot didn't know what was going on. And there's a reason they got him drunk, because they knew that he wouldn't agree to this.
But with that token, it is a form of sexual dominance exerted over the father by the daughters.
Mm-hmm. And regardless, what's produced from this is the father of the Moabites and the father of the Ammonites. And while the Moabites and the Ammonites don't have a fully terrible history, they do some decent things, and God specifically tells the Israelites to honor their borders for the sake of Lot. It even says, for the sake of Lot. Ultimately, the Moabites and the Ammonites turn on Israel and fight them.
It's another generation of choosing to go left.
Mm-hmm.
One question that I have here is, why does it seem like some women in the Bible conceive on demand, whereas others take a really long time? Do you have any thoughts?
As far as why some people seem to get pregnant very quickly and other people don't, that seems true to life. It's
does.
weird because some people really do just immediately. They don't even want to get pregnant. And then the one time that they ever have sex in their life, and just immediately they get pregnant.
But these are two sisters, two separate women who may be synced up on the same cycle and whatever, but to have their ovulation one day apart, and it's the perfect timing, and it's that evening, like all of that is very scientifically difficult to line up. And yet they both got pregnant on the first try, day after each other. Like, it's just too good to be true.
So sometimes in storytelling, and this is even something that Nabil talks about in his book, it's not a lie. What it is, they compress some events to make things easier to write down.
Maybe.
To make it more convenient. So this could have taken place over a few days, or the details of the event could have been slightly different. But effectively, the writer is to condense all of this and get the essence of the story down, which is the most important part. This is what happens. Similar things are told in the Gospels when there are certain details that are added in some books that are not in others. Like when it says before the rooster crows versus the rooster crows twice. So if it hasn't crowed twice, so why include twice? Some details are sometimes left out of stories, or certain stories are crammed together just a bit to reduce on the amount of time you spend writing it, or to make things a bit easier to understand. The point is that both of these women got pregnant by their father. That's ultimately what the point of the story is. Now, that's assuming that's the case. It's also possible that the two women did get pregnant immediately. But it's also important to remember that ancient people weren't stupid. They understood how pregnancy worked.
Yeah.
But these were virgins.
Yes.
These were virgins, and the entire story about Abraham and Sarah is all about barrenness.
Mm-hmm.
Why did a cursed union between father and daughter conceive immediately, where a blessed union between Abraham and Sarah did not conceive for 100 years? That's an important contrast. That's a pattern that is opposite. It's another opposite for Lot that Abraham had, where Abraham appears to be cursed, and Sarah basically says God prevented them from getting pregnant. And then we have Lot here, who's having, this double pregnancy situation with his two daughters happen very quickly. I don't think that's just coincidental, and I do think it's an important factor.
I agree. Actually, I do. While there is the potential explanation that the details were compressed and this happened over a longer period of time, even if that was the case, it wouldn't be over such a long period of time that it would make a lot more sense. It would still be very quick for these girls to get pregnant. It's not months or years apart. I agree. I think one of the big issues a lot of people have in this world is that there are times where people will spend their entire life doing the right thing, and it never seems to pay off for them. And then there are other people who take the wrong, crooked, easy way, and their life seems to pan out immediately. Again, this goes to Job. Job does everything right, and his life falls apart. And he even laments. In one of his many laments, he's like, why is it that the evil are rewarded? Everything good seems to happen to them, and they go peacefully off to Sheol when they die. There's no justice in the way that they die. They should die horribly. They don't. It's the two sides of the same coin. One, if bad things always happen to bad people, they wouldn't do bad things so that bad things wouldn't happen to them. And if good things always happen to good people, they'll just keep doing good because the good things are happening. God doesn't always curse in obvious ways the bad decisions of evil people. Sometimes they pay out because they have to, because if bad decisions never worked, you wouldn't do them. And that wouldn't be a reasonable thing to do in free will. We have to have consequences, but the consequences do get used for good. The Moabites and the Ammonites do end up doing good things. They do fight the Nephilim. It isn't until much later that ultimately they turn against the Israelites. Ultimately, the bad way is the bad way because it stands in opposition to God, and ultimately it always doesn't pay off. but it's always in the long run. Short term, you can do bad things and good things will happen to you, potentially. But that's the explanation. We do good, not so that good things happen to us, but because it's what God wants us to do. And similarly, if the girls hadn't done this, and if Lot hadn't been stupid, and if they had all returned and rejoined with Abraham, they wouldn't have had this stupid decision. They would have been all one family, and they could have all grown as one family. But they didn't do that. There have to be consequences. We can't live in a world without consequences, because a world without consequences is a world without choice.
Yeah, and the story of Lot consistently follows the choice of man, like that eastward heading, like constantly going against what God is wanting. The judgment of Sodom, Lot fought that. He fought leaving. He fought where the angels were going to take him. We don't get that in text. It wasn't Zoar, though. Maybe the plan was to reunite him with Abraham. And again, Lot chose east and the way against God.
It reminds me of the story of Mark 10:17-31. It's the story of Jesus and the rich young man. And he's, what do I have to do to achieve eternal life? And then Jesus tells him, I do that. And then Jesus is, and also give up everything you have and follow me. And the guy's, I can't do that. So he doesn't, and he's sad. And it's like that for Lot. Like, he hesitated to leave certain death, knowing that it would be a hard walk to righteousness. But the rich young man hesitated to accept eternal life. Lot hesitated to accept just life. There are these interesting connections and comparisons between Abraham and Lot, and then this story and future stories. And I love seeing the tie-ins for church history, because we see where it's relatable to us, where it's relevant, and we have a better appreciation at the end of it, because we know why God made decisions, not in full, because we could never fully comprehend God and his mind, but we understand a little bit more. And we have less of a childlike perspective, and we can actually chew on some of this meat a little bit. This was a lot. Lots and lots of Lot. But if you have questions about today's episode or previous episodes, please reach out to us. Never wrestle alone. That is one of the traps of deconstruction. And we are here for you if you feel like you need to talk out some of your questions. And we might not have all of the answers, but we will wrestle with you. So we would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.